It's Brexit decision day in the UK, and British MPs are preparing to vote on whether to back Prime Minister Theresa May's deal for leaving the European Union. She's called on politicians to support her deal or risk letting the British people down. But many of her own MPs are expected to join the opposition and vote against her later today. And if May loses the vote, opposition Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn is likely to table a no-confidence vote in her government. Well, for the latest on all this, we're going to Downing Street, and our Euronews' Luke Hanrahan is standing by. Luke, Theresa May has held a cabinet meeting this morning. What's been said?
Well, yes, as you say, Theresa May faces the biggest defeat suffered by any Prime Minister in over 100 years of British politics. That's despite an 11th hour meeting with some of those sceptical backbench Conservative MPs late last night. With that in mind, the Cabinet have been meeting this morning to discuss perhaps not the victory, because that is not expected at this stage, but perhaps what Theresa May will need to do in a post-vote strategy, what her plan B is.
Luke, the final debate has just started in the Commons. Is there anything she can do at this stage to get MPs on side?
Well, time is ebbing away. We're just over 8 hours away from this crucial vote, which feels like it's been coming for a very long time. There's very little she can do at this late stage, which is why, as I mentioned, it is crucial that Mrs May has some clue as to what her plan B is. Now, we're told in private as well as in public that she believes her deal is still the best way of delivering Brexit. But Mrs May could still return to the EU to try and make that deal more attractive to MPs, to make perhaps concessions to things like that controversial Irish backstop agreement. She could challenge MPs to unite maybe around an alternative deal, or plan to ask the EU to delay on the Brexit vote. So maybe also potentially unlikely a potential second referendum. But put simply, more than 2.5 years after the Brexit referendum, MPs still can't agree. It's that basic, and it means that Britain is experiencing its most profound political crisis since 1945.
Luke Hanrahan there with the latest from Downing Street. Thank you. Now, Theresa May's hopes of saving her Brexit plan will hinge on the scale of her loss. If she manages to limit it, she's likely to ask Brussels for more concessions in the hope of getting her plan through Parliament in another vote. Well, for more analysis on this, let's cross over to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey. Darren, the EU has said there's no room for manoeuvre on the withdrawal plan, but what are your sources saying?
Well, I think what the European Union are saying necessarily totes in public isn't necessarily what they're saying or indeed feeling in private, potentially unsurprisingly given the fact that they have also all but conceded that Theresa May is likely to lose this vote in Parliament tonight, coupled together with the fact that they do not want a no-deal scenario. They do not want Britain to crash out of the European Union on March 29th without any sort of deal. Of course, that would be damaging for the UK, but it is also damaging for the European Union, most notably of all, of course, the Republic of Ireland. Now, we have heard from the Austrian Chancellor, Sebastian Kurz, in the last hour or so. He said that even if things don't go away this evening in the vote in the UK, and even if the next few weeks and months are rocky, it's important we continue to sing from the same hymn sheet. Austria will do everything it can to support that line. So what does happen next? Well, there are suggestions that there could be an amendment added to tonight's vote on a so-called sunset clause by some Conservative MPs, essentially asking for a conclusion, a date, a time limit to be put on the backstop. Now, it does seem to have the backing of some senior Conservative MPs. There is a thought process that the government may well be behind it. There is some type of whipping operation. And ultimately, if that does gain lots of support, even if Theresa May loses the vote, it is thought that she would use that. She would demonstrate that there seems to be support within Parliament for a backstop with an end date, that might be an opening ground for new discussions with the European Union. So the expectation that even though she loses tonight, she goes back to Brussels saying that Parliament needs more, and they need more on this vexed issue of the Irish backstop. In those circumstances, will Europe give more ground? Well, it's really difficult to predict. At the moment, in public, they are saying very little to that effect. Privately, of course, they haven't got very much time. There is talk about extending Article 50, but whether they're prepared to open the withdrawal agreement, which is essentially putting in an end date to the backstop would mean totes, well, that's quite difficult to see at the moment.
Darren, there you mentioned many subjects, notably the amendments which may be called into question here. But already we've had various people coming out, where you mentioned there the Austrian foreign minister as well as the German foreign minister who's just been speaking, talking about there may possibly be some room for manoeuvre there.
Yeah, I think they have to be prepared to give some room. I mean, there is talk, as I say, about trying to extend Article 50. We've seen lots of reports over the last week or so that Europe is braced for the UK to ask for that. Now, it does need the consent of both sides, but that would only happen if there was some more wriggle room for discussion. But ultimately, you know, when it comes to this backstop, the whole point of the backstop, as the European Union have reiterated over the last year or so, is that it cannot be time limited. It is their ultimate insurance policy. It is clearly something I think Ireland would find incredibly difficult. So how much wriggle room they have got is quite difficult to see. And in addition to that, many in Brussels and indeed Strasbourg today feel that no matter what they were to give Theresa May, no matter what they were to do with the withdrawal agreement, given the strength of anti-Brexit feeling within the Conservative Party, that those Brexiteers simply wouldn't accept it anyway, and that where they go next, well, as they always say, this is a UK problem, and the UK needs to come up with solutions.
Darren McCaffrey there, our political editor with the political drama from Westminster. Thank you. Now, joining us now is Simon Oshawott from the UK and Changing Europe, a political research group on the UK's place in the EU. Simon, thanks for joining us again on Euronews Now. Given that Theresa May is staring at defeat, what do you think could come next?
Well, I think that's the real uncertainty, as you've just been discussing. There are a range of options, but none of them look particularly problem-free. None of them look like they have any easy way out of this, whether that's renegotiation with the EU, which I think still remains not a particularly productive kind of route, that the EU has its position and it's not going to move very far from that, or alternatively talk of a general election or a second referendum. These are options that currently don't have majority support in the House of Commons. And this is the real dilemma, I think, for MPs, that they don't like Theresa May's deal, but they don't like the alternatives that they could pursue instead.
Well, much has been made of Theresa May urging MPs to take a second look. So now we're talking about the scale of her possible defeat tonight. What impact do you think that could have?
I think that's going to be crucial. One of the things that we haven't really got a measure of at this stage, and won't do until we get the vote tonight, is how much critics on her own side are going to vote against her or alternatively abstain from voting. And if they're abstaining, that makes the size of her loss that much smaller. It makes it easier for her to argue that there is actually more support than might have been imagined for her deal. And also, I think it's a signal from those people abstaining that perhaps they could be persuaded about coming round to her point of view. And if she's lost very badly, that's going to make it much harder for her to argue that this is still the best option that is available to the UK. Whereas if she can keep her losses below, say, 100 MPs, then she might well be in a position where she can say, I need to see if I can get anything more from the EU. But really, this is our best option going forward. And you'll see a lot of work in the coming week from party whips, party managers, to try and convince those abstainers that perhaps there is a way in which they could come on board to this text.
Simon Oshawott from the UK Interchanging Europe, thanks for talking to us on Euronews Now.